These lessons could change your future. Just one small click. Subscribe and grow with us. You're watching, learning, feeling. Will you stay with us? Just one click to subscribe means everything.
There is an ancient Chinese stratagem: deceive the heavens to cross the ocean. Imagine a crisp, late autumn day in Washington, D.C., 2012. Beneath a blue sky, a prestigious art gala unfolds at the Smithsonian. A famed Chinese artist is celebrated. Dignitaries gather. Champagne flows. And then, a towering Christmas tree explodes. Yes, explodes. Black smoke, scorched pine needles, a chilling spectacle courtesy of Kai Guoqiang, China's celebrated artist. The same artist who called 9/11 a spectacle, and who simulates IEDs as performance art. That day, in front of the National Mall, he detonated a tree mere weeks before Christmas, a gesture that few questioned but many clapped for. Michael Pillsbury, former Pentagon official and once a panda hugger of U.S. China policy, was in that crowd. In retrospect, that moment was symbolic. It wasn't just explosive art, it was quiet mockery. Kai's fans, many of them nationalist Chinese hawks, celebrated his symbolism. The subversion of American icons, in full view, funded by the U.S. taxpayer. That incident serves as a metaphor for America's long misreading of China. We believed in engagement. We trusted peaceful rise rhetoric. We misunderstood subtle warnings, misread cultural codes, and projected our democratic values onto a very different civilization. What we failed to see or refused to believe is what Pillsbury now exposes: China's stealthy, long-game strategy to displace the United States as the world's dominant superpower by 2049, the 100th anniversary of the communist victory. Welcome to the 100-year marathon. Chapter 1, The China Dream. There cannot be two suns in the sky, nor two emperors on the earth. Confucius. In March 2013, Xi Jinping ascended to the Chinese presidency. To many Western observers, he seemed like a moderate, a reformer. But behind the genial smile was a deeper ambition, what he called the China Dream, or in military circles, the strong nation dream. This dream wasn't new. It was seated in humiliation, what Chinese history books refer to as the Century of Humiliation, beginning with the First Opium War in 1839 and ending in 1949 with Mao's victory. But what does rejuvenation mean to Chinese strategists? It means returning to China's rightful place atop the global order. For the Communist Party, and particularly its nationalist hawks known as Ingpai, it means the restoration of a civilizational superpower status, one that predates Western dominance. Colonel Lu Mingfu, a key Chinese military theorist, made this ambition explicit in his book The China Dream, calling for China to surpass the United States, not through war, but through a long, calculated competition, a marathon. He predicted that by 2049, China would be the leading global power, militarily, economically, and culturally. Xi Jinping picked up this baton. Under his leadership, ancient doctrines like the 36 stratagems are not folklore, they're policy. One of them, hide your strength, bide your time, became official doctrine under Deng Xiaoping and remains central today. And unlike the West, China doesn't separate military from business, economics from espionage, or ideology from trade. Everything feeds into the grand objective, replacing, not just competing with, American hegemony. Chapter 2, Warring States. To understand China's strategy, you must understand its history, especially the Warring States period. Forget 1776 or 1492. China thinks in dynasties. The Warring States era, 475 to 221 BCE, was a brutal, Machiavellian time when 7 kingdoms fought for dominance. Intrigue, betrayal, deception, all were acceptable, even noble, tools of statecraft. This era produced Sun Tzu's Art of War, but more importantly, a strategic culture that prizes indirect action, patient manipulation, and the long view. The modern Pi generals draw lessons from this period to guide 21st century policy. Pillsbury argues that while the West views diplomacy as transactional and open, China sees it as a chessboard, where misdirection and delay are signs of wisdom. In the 1990s, Chinese leaders adopted the slogan Tao Guangyang Hui, often translated as, "Buy time, build capabilities." In its original Warring States context, it meant, hide your ambition until you can destroy the hegemon. Chinese generals and officials don't view the United States as a partner. They see America as the BA, or reigning hegemon, and themselves as the inevitable successor. For decades, the US dismissed these ancient ideas as academic or fringe. But Chinese officials, especially in defense and intelligence, refer to them frequently in internal writings and restricted military texts. Worse, according to Pillsbury, many US-China experts don't speak fluent Mandarin. That means we rely on filtered translations and curated narratives, while key documents expressing China's true intent remain unread and misunderstood.
Chapter 3: Only China could go to Nixon. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Cold War dynamics changed. The US was seeking a wedge between China and the USSR. Nixon, guided by Henry Kissinger, made the historic move to open relations with Beijing. What few realized was that China used this moment as a pivot point, not just to open up, but to launch its marathon. Pillsbury, then a young intelligence officer, was part of the machinery that analyzed signals from Chinese and Soviet sources. Soviet defectors warned him, "China will use you like they used us." But the allure of Beijing's cooperation against Moscow was too strong. Mao and Zhou Enlai were masters of signaling. They made the US believe they wanted rapprochement, and they did, but only on terms that advanced China's long-term revival. The Chinese adopted a brilliant ancient strategy: kill with a borrowed sword. In other words, use the strength of one enemy to weaken another, then turn on the first. China played the US and USSR against each other for decades. The United States helped China modernize its economy, build universities, expand technology, and even transferred military tech, all under the assumption that engagement would create a responsible stakeholder. We believed that China wanted to be like us. They didn't. Chapter 4: Mr. White and Ms. Green. By the 1980s and 90s, Pillsbury was deep inside the Pentagon and intelligence circles, often dealing directly with Chinese military officials. During this period, America's support of China reached its height. U.S. officials dubbed Mr. White and Ms. Green were code names used by Chinese hawks to describe American naivety. White represented innocence, green symbolized money. Pillsbury admits he was once among them a true believer in engagement. What he and others failed to grasp was that China was studying the US not to imitate its democracy, but to learn its weaknesses. In the words of one Chinese defector Pillsbury interviewed, "America is a nation that helps its enemy become stronger." He reveals chilling anecdotes. A Chinese general bragging that their entire cyber strategy was built off NSA documents stolen via US tech firms. Confucian quoting advisors explaining to Pillsbury that it's not yet time to measure the emperor's cauldrons, an ancient phrase meaning, don't challenge the hegemon until you are sure you can win. And so, step by step, China played the long game. They built global infrastructure. They studied our political divisions. They infiltrated academia and think tanks. They focused on asymmetrical warfare, cyber, space, psychological operations, all while continuing to receive investment, education, and diplomatic cover from the very country they aimed to supplant. Final thoughts on Part 1. This is not a rivalry. It is a replacement plan, one that was invisible to most American policymakers for 40-plus years. The 100-year marathon is not just an exposé of Chinese ambition. It's a confession. Chapter 5, America, the Great Satan. Inside China, a dangerous mythology is being told, one that portrays the United States not as a flawed ally, but as a devious, immoral, and declining empire. This narrative is not fringe. It is cultivated by Chinese hardliners and accepted by millions. To the hawks in China, the United States is Megwa de Emo America, the Great Satan. Pillsbury explains how this anti-American sentiment is not a spontaneous cultural bias, but a deliberate narrative built and fed through education, military briefings, and state media. He recounts how Chinese children are taught from their earliest years that the West, especially the United States, has victimized China for centuries. The Boxer Rebellion, the Opium Wars, the carving up of China by imperialists, these stories are emphasized and expanded. America is depicted as the latest in a line of foreign oppressors. But while Britain and Japan were past threats, the U.S. is the most insidious because it pretends to be a friend. According to Pillsbury, the CCP uses this contrast to paint U.S. diplomacy as hypocrisy cloaked in smiles. Some examples Pillsbury notes. In state-run TV and newspapers, America is portrayed as violent and decaying. Hollywood films like American Sniper or The Godfather are used to illustrate the moral rot of U.S. society. In Chinese military academies, lectures emphasize U.S. global bullying and stress the need for China to resist U.S.-led containment. But here's the most telling part. This narrative is believed at the top. Chinese generals and Politburo members echo it, privately and publicly. Pillsbury also describes internal CCP seminars he attended, where party officials calmly discussed the collapse of the American system as inevitable. They believed the U.S. was in terminal decline, divided, overstretched, morally weak, and that China's time was approaching. And yet, all the while, they continued to receive U.S. trade deals, tech cooperation, and diplomatic courtesies. China's narrative war is not just about the U.S. being flawed, it's about America being the final obstacle to China's rightful place atop the global hierarchy. That's what makes it so dangerous. It's not a grudge. It's a mission. Chapter 6, China's Message Police. Every nation has a messaging strategy. But China takes it to another level, one that fuses censorship, psychological operations, and domestic surveillance into a vast machine Pillsbury calls the message police. At the core of this machine is the Central Propaganda Department, CPD, a powerful body within the CCP tasked with managing every form of information in China: newspapers, books, television, movies, academia, and the internet. Pillsbury explains how the CPD doesn't just control what people see. It controls how they interpret what they see. Some methods. Censorship: anything that contradicts the party narrative is deleted or blocked. Amplification: stories of Chinese success or Western failure are boosted and repeated endlessly. Subtle shaping: Chinese films are vetted to ensure they depict authority as benevolent and foreign influence as chaotic or immoral. Even language itself is policed. For example, the word democracy is filtered or redirected. Tiananmen brings up patriotic music or state-sanctioned versions of 1989 events. Dalai Lama is presented as a separatist, not a religious leader. Pillsbury also reveals how the system has a global arm. Through Confucius Institutes, friendly media outlets, and academic partnerships, the CCP shapes how the outside world sees China. This extends into U.S. universities, where pro-China talking points are promoted and criticism is quietly punished, often by threatening Chinese students or withdrawing research cooperation. Then there's the 50-cent army-paid online commenters whose job is to flood Chinese forums and social media with pro-party content. They're called 50 centers because they were originally paid 50 sen per post. Their influence is vast. At a deeper level, Pillsbury says China's message strategy operates like a constant, low-level psychological operation. It doesn't aim to persuade the West in a traditional sense. It aims to confuse, delay, distract, and divide. While Americans argue over whether China is friend or foe, China quietly presses forward. Chapter 7. The Assassin's Mace. Assassin's mace, a phrase that may sound like fantasy, but in Chinese military doctrine, it's very real. Known in Mandarin as shashujian, the assassin's mace is a class of strategies and weapons designed to neutralize a more powerful enemy with surprise, asymmetry, and cunning. Pillsbury explains that these aren't sci-fi concepts. They're deeply embedded in Chinese military planning and are specifically aimed at America's vulnerabilities. The assassin's mace strategy draws directly from the Warring States period. The idea is to weaken or paralyze a stronger opponent through unexpected and disruptive strikes, not head-on confrontation. So what are China's assassin's mace tools? 1. Cyber warfare. China has built one of the world's most advanced state-sponsored hacking programs. Massive intrusions into U.S. government databases, like the OPM hack in 2015. Theft of defense contractor blueprints from stealth jets to missile systems. Infiltration of infrastructure, water systems, power grids, and satellites. 2. Anti-satellite weapons, ASAT. China knows the U.S. relies on satellites for navigation, GPS, communications, surveillance, and targeting. In 2007, China shocked the world by destroying one of its own satellites in orbit with a missile, a clear demonstration of its ASAT capability. Pillsbury reveals U.S. intelligence saw this as a warning shot. The Chinese can blind the U.S. military if needed. 3. Electromagnetic pulse, EMP, weapons. Chinese writings openly discuss using EMPs to fry enemy electronics. An EMP over a U.S. city or carrier fleet could paralyze defenses instantly. While such attacks seem extreme, Chinese military journals treat them as legitimate options in a Taiwan conflict. 4. Anti-carrier missiles. America's Navy is built around aircraft carriers. China has developed carrier-killer missiles like the DF-21D that can target and destroy these floating fortresses from thousands of miles away, removing one of America's most potent symbols of power. 5. Psychological and legal warfare. Beyond weapons, China uses information and law as strategic tools. Legal warfare, lawfare, flooding international bodies with technical claims to shape favorable outcomes, e.g., South China Sea disputes. Media campaigns to influence global opinion and sow confusion about U.S. credibility. The goal isn't just to beat America militarily, it's to undermine America's will to fight, its alliances, its confidence, and its narrative. Pillsbury argues that America, believing in symmetric confrontation, has been caught off guard by this holistic, indirect warfare strategy. Chapter 8. The Capitalist Charade. Many in the West believed that as China embraced markets, it would naturally liberalize. It would evolve into something more democratic, more open. But as Pillsbury makes clear, we were fooled. China's so-called economic opening was a charade, a calculated performance that gave the appearance of capitalism while preserving total party control. Let's break down the charade. 1. Private companies that aren't private. From Huawei to Alibaba, many private firms in China are deeply connected to the CCP. CEOs often hold party ranks. The state can and does step in at any moment. When Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba, criticized Chinese regulators in 2020, he vanished for months. His company was broken up. That was no coincidence. It was a message. 2. Special economic zones as illusions. The SEZs, like Shenzhen, were touted as proof that China was embracing free markets. In truth, they were pilot zones, experiments under tight party supervision. They were never meant to evolve into fully autonomous capitalist systems. 3. Foreign investment with strings. China welcomed Western capital but under strict conditions. Forced tech transfer agreements. Local partnerships required to operate. Algorithms and trade secrets demanded in exchange for access. Western companies entered the Chinese market thinking they were gaining customers. In reality, they were training their future competitors. 4. Manipulated markets. The yuan is not freely floating. Capital controls are tight. The banking sector is dominated by state banks. And the stock market is subject to manipulation, bans on short selling, and politically driven suspensions. 5. Global image laundering. China carefully choreographed its image as a poor developing country needing help even as its global influence exploded. This image helped secure trade concessions, development loans, and reduced scrutiny in international organizations. The biggest irony? Pillsbury reveals that the West helped write China's WTO entry terms with U.S. officials believing they were bringing China into the rules-based order. In reality, they were giving the party a powerful new platform. Pillsbury calls this a strategic failure of imagination. We saw what we wanted to see. A rising democracy, a free market partner, a responsible stakeholder. Instead, we nurtured a state that used capitalist tools to fortify authoritarian control and to position itself for global economic leadership. Chapter 9, A China World Order in 2049. Imagine the year 2049, the centenary of the Communist Party's victory. If China's 100-year marathon succeeds, this is the year Beijing intends to replace the United States as the world's dominant power economically, militarily, politically, and culturally. Michael Pillsbury describes how this isn't just theory, it's a target date, referenced in CCP speeches, military documents, and books like Colonel Lu Mingfu's The China Dream. So what would a China-led world look like? 1. Hierarchy, not equality. China sees the international order as a hierarchy, not a system of equals. At the top is the Tianxia, all under heaven, with China at the center. Other nations are subordinate. This system, rooted in Confucian ideals, isn't about mutual benefit. It's about deference to the central power. It favors order over liberty, harmony over dissent, and submission over independence. 2. Authoritarian governance as export. A China-led world would normalize surveillance-based governance, state-controlled media, internet censorship, technocratic rule without elections. Already, Chinese firms export this model with facial recognition tools, surveillance systems, and social credit scoring software being sold across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. 3. Decline of the dollar and Bretton Woods. China seeks to undermine the US-led economic order. It funds institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIB, as alternatives to the IMF and World Bank. It pushes the yuan as a trading currency. It builds Belt and Road partnerships with economic dependencies. The goal is not cooperation, but replacement. 4. Strategic isolation of the U.S. As China's influence spreads, it pressures nations to sever ties with Taiwan, censor criticism of China, and align with Beijing on diplomatic matters. Pillsbury points out that Hollywood has already conformed censoring scripts and storylines to gain access to Chinese theaters. This is just a taste of how a global China order would work. Economic leverage enforcing ideological compliance. He describes this not as a sudden takeover, but a gradual shift where one day we wake up and realize the global internet follows China's rules. The dominant language of AI and telecom is Mandarin, and American values are no longer universal, they're optional. Chapter 10. Warning shots. The signs were always there, but America didn't listen. Pillsbury recounts moment after moment where China revealed its intentions and Washington responded with silence, denial, or appeasement. Example 1. The embassy bombing, 1999. When NATO accidentally bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, Chinese leaders responded with massive protests and accused the U.S. of a deliberate attack. Their rhetoric equated the bombing with Nazi atrocities. The U.S. apologized. China demanded concessions. The anti-American narrative grew stronger. Example 2. The Hainan Island Incident, 2001. A Chinese fighter collided with a U.S. spy plane. China detained the crew for 11 days, stripped the plane for tech, and forced the U.S. into an apology despite their own pilot initiating the crash. Again, a propaganda win for Beijing. Example 3. Cyber theft on a massive scale. Theft of F-35 blueprints. Hacking of the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. Compromising over 20 million government workers' data. Decades of intellectual property theft from U.S. firms. Each time, the U.S. responded with diplomatic hand-wringing, not consequences. Example 4. Military expansion in the South China Sea. China built military islands on reefs claiming territory and building runways and missile bases in violation of international law. The world objected. China ignored it. Today, those islands are permanent. Pillsbury explains that these warning shots were not mere provocations. They were tests probing America's response. And each time we failed the test. Why? Because of what Pillsbury calls constructive engagement delusion, the belief that if we're nice to China, China will play fair. That trade will lead to openness. That strength provokes while kindness converts. Instead, the opposite happened. Our kindness emboldened them. Chapter 11. America as a warring state. Pillsbury ends with a bold, sobering argument. To compete with China, the United States must think more like China. That doesn't mean becoming authoritarian, but it does mean studying and applying warring states style strategy. 1. End naivete. Stop assuming China will come around or play by liberal rules. China is not westernizing. It is cynicizing the global order. 2. Prioritize strategic deception. America must stop viewing deception as dishonorable. In warfare and diplomacy, China sees deception as wise. We must adopt a realist mindset, rooted in foresight and ambiguity when necessary. 3. Educate a new class of China experts. Pillsbury criticizes how most U.S.-China experts barely speak Mandarin. He calls for a new generation of fluent, culturally literate, tough-minded analysts who can decode China's signals, not just read white papers. 4. Reinvest in deterrence. Strengthen military capabilities in Asia-Pacific. Reassure allies. Invest in technologies that counter China's assassin's mace tools. 5. Reframe the narrative. The US must stop defending the status quo and start offering a positive vision that can rival China's. If democracy is to survive, it must inspire again. Final words. Michael Pillsbury was once part of the policy machine that helped China rise. He believed in engagement. He believed in peaceful rise. But after decades of working inside US intelligence and diplomacy and gaining unprecedented access to Chinese military insiders, he changed his mind. The 100-year marathon is his confession, his warning, and his call to arms. China has a plan. It is slow, secretive, and strategic, and it's working. If America wants to remain the global leader, it must first admit this truth and then, like the sages of ancient times, play the long game.
These lessons could change your future. Just one small click. Subscribe and grow with us. You're watching, learning, feeling. Will you stay with us? Just one click to subscribe means everything.
If your journey feels stuck, you're not alone. We've got you. If you found value in this video, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps more curious minds discover this content. Subscribe to Being and Beyond and join a growing community that thrives on knowledge, perspective, and personal growth. And if this video resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Your support fuels our passion and pushes us to create better content. Welcome to Being and Beyond.